Hello, this is the Goodly Christian Witch. This is another installment for our reading of 8 Sabbats for Witches by Janet Stewart Farrar with this wonderful book. You see the ring of witches holding hands around the moon. And we're going to read this time from the portion that is for the spring equinox. And before we start, we're going to go ahead and call in the quarters and call in also from above and below the goddess and the god. So before we start, and we have our statues of angels and Jesus and Mother Mary, and we're going to ring the bell 3 times in order to create a sacred time. And then with the calling in the quarters, we create a sacred space. So first we create a sacred time by ringing the bell 3 times. First we move to the east. We're going to start off going clockwise, which is Diosil, and that builds the circle. And then when we close, we start in the north and go Widdershins or counterclockwise and dismiss everyone. So first we're going to go Diosil or clockwise down. We're going to begin in the east. Some people begin in the north to open, but our coven was taught to start in the east. I was in some covens that start in the north, but I was also in another organization that always utilized the east. So we're just going to do that because that's what I'm used to. All right, so I call the guardians of the watchtower of the east. I call the archangel Raphael, who presides over the warm, moist winds of the east, and I call upon the elementals of the east, who are the sylphs of air. Come lend your magic to our circle now, so mote it be. I call upon the guardians of the watchtower of the south. Call upon the archangel Michael, who presides over the hot, dry winds of the south. And I call upon the fire southerly elementals, who are the salamanders. Lend your magic to our circle now, so mote it be. I now call upon the guardians of the watchtower of the west. I call upon the archangel Gabriel, who presides over the cold, wet winds of the west. I call upon the elementals of water, which are the undines. Lend your magic to our circle, come now. Be here with us, so mote it be. I call upon the guardians of the watchtower of the north, the archangel Uriel, who presides over the cold, dry winds of the north. And I call upon the earth elementals of the north, who are the gnomes. Come lend your magic to our circle now, so mote it be. And above, zenith, I call upon the goddess, the queen of heaven, the woman clothed with the sun, with the moon at her feet, and a diadem of 12 stars upon her head. I call upon the Shekinah glory, who is also known as Mother Mary or the goddess Nuit. Come lend your magic to our circle now, so mote it be. And I call upon the god. I call upon the god Geb, the god Pan, the god Dionysus, and also you can utilize Jesus Christ. I call upon the god of earth. Come, lend your magic to our circle now, so mote it be. All right, now with the 6 directions called, guarding you from the 4 corners and also above and below, it creates kind of a sphere, and with which your sacred space then becomes a sphere. So this is the sacred space with the stones, and the bell creates the sacred time. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and read into the book, 8 Sabbats for Witches. by Janet Stewart Farrar. And we're going to, just for a moment, we're going to look at some of the other books that Janet Stewart Farrar have written, which are What Witches Do, The Witch's Goddess, and The Witch's Way. And 8 Sabbats for Witches, and Rites for Birth, Marriage, and Death by Janet and Stewart Farrar, with line illustrations by Stewart Farrar and photographs by Ian David and Stewart Farrar by Phoenix Publishing. And this one was the copyright's in 1981 by Janet and Stewart Farrar, again, Phoenix Publishing, from Washington, Custer, Washington. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and read from the chapter on the spring equinox. This is chapter 5. And the spring equinox, the 21st of March, is when it's celebrated here for this publication. The 21st of March, spring equinox, also called vernal equinox. And an equinox is when the day and the night is equal in length. All right. Quote, the sun, unquote, as Robert Graves puts it, quote, arms himself at the spring equinox, unquote. Light and dark are in balance, but the light is mastering the darkness. It is basically a solar festival and a newcomer to the old religion in Celtic and Teutonic Europe. Although Teutonic influence, Margaret Murray's, quote, solstitial invaders added Yule and Midsummer to the 4 great Sabbats of the pastoral Celts. The new synthesis still embraced only 6 festivals. The equinoxes, says Murray, quote, were never observed in Britain, unquote, except as we know by the pre-Celtic megalithic peoples. See page 14. Yet, the equinoxes are now unquestionably with us. Modern pagans almost universally celebrate the 8 festivals, and no one suggests that the 2 equinoxes are an innovation thought up by Gerald Gardner or by Druid revival romantics. A genuine part of pagan tradition as it exists today, even if their seeds blew in from the Mediterranean and germinated in the soil of the underground centuries long ago, along with many other fruitful elements. Wiccan purists who reject anything that stems from classical Greece or Rome, from ancient Egypt, from the Hebrew Kabbalah, or from the Tuscan Aradia had better stop celebrating the equinoxes too. The importing of such concepts is always a complex process. Folk awareness of the spring equinox in the British Isles, for example, must have been mainly imported with the Christian Easter. But Easter brought in its luggage, so to speak, the Mediterranean pagan overtones of the spring equinox. The difficulty which faces witches in deciding just how to celebrate the spring equinox Sabbat is not that the foreign associations are in fact alien to the native ones, but that they overlap with them, expressing themes that had long ago become attached to the older native Sabbats. For instance, the sacrificial mating theme in Mediterranean lands has strong links with the spring equinox, the grim festival of the Phrygian goddess Sibyl, at which the self-castration, death, and resurrection of her son/lover Attis was marked by worshippers castrating themselves to become her priests, was from 22nd to 25th March. In Rome, these rites took place on the spot where St. Peter's now stands in Vatican City. In fact, in places where Attis worship was widespread, the local Christians used to celebrate the death and resurrection of Christ at the same date, and pagans and Christians used to quarrel bitterly about which of their gods was the true prototype and which was the imitation. On sheer chronology, there should have been no dispute, because Attis came from Phrygia many centuries before Christ, but the Christians had the unanswerable argument that the devil cunningly placed counterfeits ahead of the true coming in order to deceive mankind. Easter, Jesus' willing death, descent into hell, and resurrection can be seen as the Christian version of the sacrificial mating theme for hell. In this sense, is patriarchal monotheism's view of the collective unconscious, the dreaded feminine aspect, the goddess, into whom the sacrificed God is plunged as a necessary prelude to rebirth. Christ's harrowing of hell, as described in the apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus, involved his rescuing of the souls of the just from Adam onwards, quote, who had fallen asleep since the beginning of the world, unquote, and his raising of them to heaven. Stripped of theological dogma, this can have a positive meaning. The reintegration of the buried treasures of the unconscious, the gift of the goddess, with the light of analytical consciousness, the gift of the god. Spring, too, was a particular season in the classical and pre-classical times for a form of the sacrificial mating which was also kindlier and more positive than the Attis cult, the Hieros Gamos, or sacred marriage. In this, woman identified herself with the goddess, and man sank himself into the goddess through her, giving of his masculinity but not destroying it, and emerging from the experience spiritually revitalized. The great rite, whether symbolic or actual, is obviously the witches' Hieros Gamos, and then, as now, it shocked many people who did not understand it. For a profound Jungian commentary on the Hieros Gamos, see M. Esther Harding's Woman's Mysteries. Now, before we continue to the next page, we are going to go ahead and read this footnote here, because sometimes the footnotes are so lengthy that it's almost impossible to get into a video. But this one is shorter, so we're going to go ahead and read this footnote for you, which is footnote 1, and has to do here with the Great Rite and the Hieros Gamos, and also for the Jungian commentary and all of that. We're going to go into that. So this is the footnote 1. The most savage opponents of the Hieros Gamos and all it stood for were of course the Hebrew prophets. So the Hebrew prophets is saying were the most savage opponents to the Hieros Gamos. So the most savage opponents of the Hieros Gamos and all it stood for were of course the Hebrew prophets. Their tirades against harlotry and whoring after strange gods, with which the Old Testament abounds, are political, not ethical. The goddess worship which surrounded them had, and to which ordinary Hebrew families still clung for centuries alongside the official Yahweh worship, was a direct threat to the patriarchal system they were trying to enforce. 4. Unless every woman was an exclusive chattel of her husband and a virgin on marriage, how could paternity be certain? And unquestionable paternity was the keystone of the whole system. Hence, the biblical death penalty for adulteresses, for brides found to be non-virgin, and even for the victims of rape, unless they were neither married nor betrothed, in which case they had to marry the rapist. The ruthlessness with which the Hebrews, according to the word of the Lord, massacred the entire population of conquered Canaanite cities, men, women, and children, except for any attractive virgins whom the word of the Lord permitted them to kidnap as wives, and even the Levitic rewriting of the creation myth to give divine sanction to male superiority, it is interesting that the serpent and the tree were both universally recognized goddess symbols. From this ancient political battle, Christianity, outdoing even Judaism and Islam, inherited the hatred of sex, the warped aestheticism, and the contempt for women that has bedeviled it from St. Paul onwards and is still far from dead. See again Merlin Stone's Paradise Papers. All right, we're going to continue now with this portion up here with Chapter 5, Spring Equinox, 8 Sabbats for Witches. But in the north, where spring comes later, these aspects really belong to Beltane instead of to the observed equinox, and it is at Beltane, as will be seen, that we have placed our corresponding love chase ritual. It is perhaps significant that Easter, owing to the complex lunar method of dating it, reflects this overlap by falling anywhere from just after the equinox to just before Beltane. Easter, by the way, is named after the Teutonic goddess Ostara, whose name is probably yet another variant of Ishtar, Astarte, and Aset, the correct Egyptian name Isis being the Greek form. Ostara's spring rites bore a family resemblance to those of the Babylonian Ishtar, another piece of pagan luggage. But if in the human fertility aspect the spring equinox must bow to Beltane, it can properly retain the vegetation fertility aspect, even if in the north it marks a different stage of it. Round the Mediterranean, the equinox is the time of sprouting. In the north, it is the time of sowing. So again, let me read this one more time. Round the Mediterranean, the equinox is the time of sprouting. In the north, it is a time of sowing. As a solar festival too, it must share with the greater Sabbats the eternal theme of fire and light, which has survived strongly in Easter folklore. In many parts of Europe, particularly Germany, Easter bonfires are lit with fire obtained from the priest on traditional hilltop sites often known locally as Easter Mountain. Relic of earlier larger scale customs, see under Beltane, page 82. As far as the light shines, it is believed the land will be fruitful and the home secure. And, as always, people jump the dying embers and cattle are driven over them. The Book of Shadows says that for this festival, quote, the symbol of the wheel should be placed on the altar flanked with burning candles or fire in some form, unquote. So, assuming this to be one of the genuine traditional elements which Gardner was given, we can take it that British witches, in absorbing the non-native equinoxes into their calendar, used the fire wheel symbol, which also features in many different midsummer folk customs throughout Europe. A hint that the solar fire wheel is a genuine equinoctial tradition and not merely a gap-filling choice of Gardner's may be found in the custom of wearing shamrock on St. Patrick's Day, which falls on the 17th March. According to the usual explanation, the shamrock became Ireland's national emblem because St. Patrick once used its three-leaf shape to illustrate the doctrine of the Trinity. But the Oxford English Dictionary says this tradition is late, and in fact, the first printed reference to it was in an 18th century botanical work, and Dinan's Irish-English Dictionary, defining Simrog, says its use as a national emblem in Ireland and incidentally in Hanover, in the home territory of the solstitial invaders, is possibly a survival of the Tridentra, a Christianized wheel or sun symbol. and adds that the four-leaved variety is believed to bring luck, related to an early apotropaic sign enclosed in a circle sun or wheel symbol. The St. Patrick's Day shamrock has become standardized as the lesser yellow trefoil, Trifolium dubis or minus, but in Shakespeare's day shamrock meant wood sorrel, Oxalis astosella, and Dineen defined simrog as a shamrock, trefoil, clover, a bunch of green grass. Culper's Complete Herbal says all the sorrels are under the dominion of Venus, unquote. So the threefold spring green leaves in the Irishman's equinox buttonhole bring us back not only to the sun god, but also through the modern screen of the Trinity to the triple goddess. Artemis, the Greek triple moon goddess, fed her hinds on trefoil. And as for the lucky four-leaved variety, any Jungian psychologist and the lords of the watchtowers will tell you that the quartered circle is an archetypal symbol of wholeness and balance. The solar fire wheel, the Celtic cross, the four-leaved shamrock, the magic circle with its four cardinal candles, the Egyptian hieroglyph Nut meaning town, the Easter hot cross bun, the Byzantine basilica, all deliver the same immemorial message much older than Christianity. The Easter egg, too, is pre-Christian. It is the world egg laid by the goddess and split open by the heat of the sun god. And the hatching out of the world was celebrated each year at the spring festival of the sun, unquote. Graves, The White Goddess, page 248 to 249. Originally, it was a snake's egg. The Caduceus of Hermes portrays the coupling snakes, goddess and god, who produced it. But under the influence of the Orphic mysteries, as Graves points out, quote, since the cock was the Orphic bird of resurrection, sacred to Apollo's son, Esculapius, the healer, hen's egg, took the place of snakes in the later Druidic mysteries and were colored scarlet in the sun's honor and became Easter eggs. Decorated eggs, boiled in an infusion of furze blossom, were rolled down hillsides in Ireland on Easter Monday. Stewart wrote in What Witches Do, quote, the spring equinox is obviously an occasion for decorating the room with daffodils and other spring blossoms, and also for honoring one of the younger women by appointing her the coven's spring queen and sending her home afterwards with an armful of the flowers. We have kept to this pleasant little custom. The preparation. A wheel symbol stands on the altar. It may be anything that feels suitable, and a cutout disc painted yellow or gold and decorated with spring flowers, a circular mirror, a round brass tray. Ours is a 14-inch drum kit symbol, highly polished and with a daffodil or primrose posy in its central hole. The high priest's robe, if any, and accessories should be symbolic of the sun. Any metal he wears should be gold, gilt, brass, or bronze. The altar and room should be decorated with spring flowers, particularly the yellow ones, such as daffodils, primroses, gorse, or forsythia. The bouquet should be ready for handing. The bouquet should be ready for handing to the spring queen, and a chaplet of flowers for her crowning. The cauldron is placed in the center of the circle with an unlit candle inside it. A taper is ready on the altar for the maiden to carry fire to the high priest. A phallic wand is ready on the altar. Half as many cords as there are people present are ready on the altar, tied together at their center point in a single knot. If there is an odd number of people, add 1 before dividing by 2. For 9 people, take 5 cords. If you like, you can have a bowl of hard-boiled eggs with painted shells, scarlet all over, or decorated as you wish. On the altar, 1 for each person, plus 1 for the Siddhe on or earth offering. These can be handed out during the feasting. The ritual. The opening ritual proceeds as usual, but without the witch's rune. The high priest stand in the east and the high priestess in the west, facing each other across the cauldron. The high priestess carries the phallic wand in her right hand. The rest of the coven distribute themselves around the perimeter of the circle. The high priestess says, quote, "We kindle this fire today in presence of the holy ones, without malice, without jealousy, without envy, without fear of aught beneath the sun, but the high gods, thee we invoke, O light of life. Be thou a bright flame before us, be thou a girding star above us, be thou a smooth path beneath us. Kindle thou within our hearts a flame of love for our neighbors, to our foes, to our friends, to our kindred all, to all men on the broad earth, O merciful Son of Caradwin, from the lowliest thing that liveth to the name which is highest of all," unquote. And we have a second footnote here, which we'll be able to read for you. So we'll continue to here, and then we'll read this footnote. Okay, so the high priestess holds the phallic wand on high and walks slowly deosil round the cauldron to stand in front of the high priest. She says, the high priestess, I don't know if I said that right. The high priestess holds the phallic wand on high and walks slowly deosil round the cauldron to stand in front of the high priest. She says, quote, "O son, be thou armed to conquer the dark," unquote. The high priestess presents the phallic wand to the high priest and then steps to one side. The high priest holds up the phallic wand in salute and replaces it on the altar. Now we're going to go ahead and read to you before we get into the last sentence and go on to the next page. We're going to read you the second footnote, which goes with this spell, this ritual. Okay, so the second footnote. Adapted by Doreen Valiente from 2 Scottish Gaelic blessings in Alexander Carmichael's Carmina Gadelica, see biography. Carmichael, who lived 1832 to 1912, collected and translated a rich harvest of Gaelic prayers and blessings handed down by word of mouth in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. As Doreen says, quote, "This beautiful old poetry is really sheer paganism with a thin Christian veneer," unquote. The 6-volume Carmina Gadelica, though a treasure to own, is expensive. Fortunately, a selection of the English translations has been published as a recent paperback, The Sun Dances, see biography, and then continues. The 2 sources Doreen used here will be found on pages 231 and 49 of Volume 1 of Carmina Gadelica, and on pages 3 and 11 of The Sun Dances. Carmichael obtained them from crofters' wives in North Uist and Lochaber, respectively. So continuing now with Eight Sabbats for Witches, Spring Equinox, 21st March, the maiden lights the taper from one of the altar candles and presents it to the high priest. The maiden then steps to one side. The high priest carries the taper to the cauldron and lights the cauldron candle with it. He gives the taper back to the maiden, who blows it out and replaces it on the altar, picking up the cords instead. The maiden gives the cords to the high priest. The high priestess arranges everybody round the cauldron man facing woman as far as possible. The high priest hands out the ends of the cords in accordance with her instructions, retaining one end of the final cord himself and handing the other end of it to the high priestess. If there is an odd number of people, with more women than men, he retains 2 cord ends himself, or, with more men than women, hands 2 cord ends to the high priestess. In either case, he must be linked with 2 women, or she with 2 men. When everyone is holding a cord, they all pull the cords taut, with the central knot above the cauldron. They then start circling Deosil in the wheel dance to the witch's rune, building up speed, always keeping the cords taut and the knot over the cauldron. The wheel dance continues till the high priestess cries, "Down!" and the coven all sit in a circle round the cauldron. The high priest gathers up the cords, being careful not to let them drop onto the candle flame, and replaces them on the altar. The cauldron is then moved to beside the east candle, and the great rite is enacted. After the great rite, the high priest names the woman witch. Names a woman witch. Okay, after the great rite, the high priest names a woman witch as the spring queen, and stands her in front of the altar. He crowns her with the chaplet of flowers and gives her the 5-fold kiss. The high priest then calls forward each man in turn to give the spring queen the 5-fold kiss. When the last man has done so, the high priest presents the spring queen with her bouquet. The cauldron is replaced on the center of the circle, and starting with the spring queen, everyone jumps the cauldron, singly or in couples, not forgetting to wish. The cauldron jumping over the party begins. So next will be Beltane. So now, since there weren't any particular pictures or plates to show for this chapter, chapter 5, for spring equinox from March 21st, here in this publication in 8 Sabbats for Witches, I'm going to go ahead then and simply close the circle, going Widdershins or counterclockwise, starting in the north, and I'm going to dismiss all of the elementals and the angels and the gods and goddesses that we invoked. I'm going to go ahead and dismiss them and thank them, and then I'll close and undo the sacred space. Then I'll ring the bell 3 times, and I will undo the sacred time. So first I will go now to the north. I call upon the guardians of the watchtower of the north, the Archangel Uriel, who presides over the cold, dry winds of the north, and all of the earth gnomes who we have invoked. Thank you for lending your circle, your magic. Thank you for lending your magic to our circle. You may go now, and please come again when we call you. We thank you. So mote it be. Now go to the guardians of the watchtower of the west, and the Archangel Gabriel, who presides over the cold, wet winds of the west, and to the undines of water, the elementals who we called into our circle. We thank you for lending your magic to our circle, and you may now go, and please come again when we call. So mote it be. Now go to the guardians of the watchtower of the south, and the Archangel Michael, who resides over the hot, dry winds of the south, and the fire elementals of the salamanders. Thank you for lending your magic to our circle. We dismiss you now and let you go, and please come again when we call. So mote it be. We now go to the east. We call the guardians of the watchtower of the east, and the Archangel Raphael, who presides over the warm, moist winds of the east, and the elementals, the sylphs of air, Thank you for lending your magic to our circle. You may be dismissed now and go, and please come again when we call you. And I'll call upon the God of the earth, upon he who is Geb, who is Pan, who is Jesus, who is Dionysus, the god of wine. Thank you for lending your magic to our circle and your masculine principle. And you may go now, and please come again when you are called. And now we go to the goddess that we called above, the sky goddess, the goddess of heaven, the queen of heaven, the woman clothed with the sun, with the moon at her feet, and the diadem of 12 stars upon her head. I call the queen of heaven, who is Nuit, who is Mother Mary, the sky goddesses. Thank you for, and the Shekinah, thank you for lending your magic to our circle. You may go now, and please come again when we call you. And thank you everybody for being with us for this reading. This is for this spring equinox reading from 8 Sabbats for Witches by Janet Stewart Farrar, and for our being with us for this ritual circle, celebratory circle. And now we're going to ring the bell 3 times to dismiss the sacred time. Thank you. This is the Goodly Christian Witch, and we'll see you next time.